Welcome back to Global News Morning. One of modern literature's most prolific writers is out with yet another book. This one is part of his much-loved series, The #1 Ladies Detective Agency. In the series' 18th installment, Alexander McCall Smith brings us The House of Unexpected Sisters, and it's my pleasure to welcome Alexander McCall Smith to the show this morning. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Welcome to Halifax. It's been a while.
Thank you. It has. It's been about 10 years.
Is it different?
Have
you seen anything?
I suspect it's different.
Yeah.
Everywhere's different.
I bet that it's always, you're seeing so many different places.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
You were speaking at the Halifax Central Library
That's right.
last night
Yeah.
about this book.
Yes.
It's amazing how many books you've written just this year, let alone in your lifetime. I'm just wondering, for the people who love this series,
yes.
what can they expect from this book?
Well, they'll be back with Precious Motswe and her friends in Botswana. So they'll meet all the familiar characters again, which I think people rather like. Mm-hmm. I rather like reading serial novels where you're meeting people you've met before on the page.
Mm-hmm. There's a bit of comfort in there.
There's comfort, yes. And so Mara Motswe will be with the reader again. In this case, there are obviously new issues that she's dealing with. She's dealing with the case of unfair dismissal. And then the title does rather give it away. The House of Unexpected Sisters, you see.
In a way, but it's kind of mysterious.
It is a bit. But you know that sisters are going to be involved.
Right. And so it's interesting to me, you say readers like to come back to the characters they know,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
But it's almost 20 years since your first novel in this series came out. Mm-hmm. Just wonder, can you speak at all about how do you keep the story going?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Obviously, there have to be developments, and there are developments in the characters' lives, although you don't want to make their lives too dramatically different. I think the way in which one keeps a series like this going is that you create new situations and new challenges for the characters, and then you have a certain amount of development in their personal lives. But I think, generally speaking, people don't want the central characters to change too much.
Right.
So, and I don't really put in anything terribly dramatic. I mean, I don't like to lose my characters. Mm-hmm. Some authors will kill off their characters at the drop of a hat, but I don't do that.
Right, but it's a bit of a balancing act, I guess, by keeping the plot going, keeping the interest, and not being too similar or too repetitive.
Exactly. I think you have to make the issues fresh ones, and you have to perhaps bring in new dimensions of the lives of the characters that perhaps you haven't explored in the past.
And interestingly, I know your followers, the people who really follow you closely will know this, but you don't just write this series, even though there's 18 books already in that one. You have other series and other books. I think you've published 4 this year.
I do about 4 or 5 books a year, which is breaking all the known rules of publishing. Publishers say you shouldn't do that, but I do.
And so if people have tried this book and maybe it's not quite their taste, what other of your books would you suggest?
Well, there's a series called the Isabel Dalhousie series, and I've written 12 books in that series. She's a moral philosopher who lives in Edinburgh and who sorts out people's problems, and she has her following. Then there's a series called the 44 Scotland Street series, which is a proper serial novel in that I publish the chapters as I write them in the Scotsman newspaper, and then they appear in a book. And that used to be the way in which most books were written.
Absolutely.
That's what Dickens did, and Tolstoy, and all sorts of people did. It was a standard thing. Then that was revived by Armistead Maupin with his Tales of the City series set in San Francisco.
It's interesting, though, that you do that. You must be one of the few people that actually does still publish in a newspaper as you go, and even that a newspaper is still willing to do that.
Yes. Well, yes, it is the longest, my Scotland Street series is the longest running serial novel, proper serial novel in the world. And I like doing that. I enjoy. Of course, it means that you can't really change it after you've published a chapter as you go along. So if you want to get rid of a character, you've got to somehow deal with that, because if you're editing the manuscript, you can remove them.
You can change everything. It kind of sets in stone.
It sets it in stone before the book is finished.
Interesting. So I always like to ask authors what they're reading.
Well, I read all sorts of things. I read quite a lot of non-fiction. probably more non-fiction than I read fiction.
Well, you're also a professor, right?
Yes, was a professor. I'm a professor emeritus. So
a busy man.
But I'm reading at the moment. Well, actually, I'm sitting down and going through Homer because I'd read excerpts, like most people. I'd read bits and pieces of it, but I realized that I hadn't read the Iliad from start to finish.
Okay, well, I'm going to suggest most people would probably rather pick up this book than Homer, but maybe.
No, Homer's jolly good.
You can add it to your Christmas list. We'll see which one.
Homer should, ideal Christmas present, the Odyssey or the Iliad.
Okay, well, between Homer, the Odyssey, or the Iliad, or this wonderful new book from Alexander McCall Smith, you can catch him at Acadia University this evening at 7 o'clock. The information for that is on your screen now. Alexander McCall Smith, thank you so much for coming onto the show. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed.